You're watching Beyond Markets. Welcome, I'm Esther Awuni. Many thanks for joining us. On today's show, we'll discuss how broadband access can drive Nigeria's future economy. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther O. Awuni. Now, the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development targets 65% broadband penetration for developing countries by the year 2025. Now, how can Nigeria position itself to achieve this feat? Levine, CEO of HIP Consult, and Funke Opeke, CEO of Mainone, join me now to discuss this. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today.
Thank you.
Great to have you on the show. Now, broadband is something that, it's still a work in progress here in Nigeria. A lot of investments continue to go into it. The government has shown a good amount of interest in getting, especially that private cash in, private sector in to help develop or just lay more deepen penetration as well. Funke, let me start with you in terms of the progress we've made so far as a country. And of course, it's been well established that that link between broadband penetration and economic prosperity, as it were. Well, talk to us about, from a Nigeria perspective, where we are right now in terms of what we've been able to achieve so far.
What we've been able to achieve so far on the back of the National Broadband Plan that was put in place in 2013 is 30% penetration rates across the country as of the end of last year. So you just stated a 65% objective. The NCC has stated the objective for the next phase is really 70%. So we still have considerable distance to go. And when you look at even markets like Lagos, the penetration is not much higher in terms of how much of the population really have that continuous pervasive access to the internet, and so how much of our economy, how much of our productivity is able to take advantage of broadband technology and the power of the internet. And so that's where we are, and that is what informs some of these programs, such as the one that Mainone has put together called Digital Lagos.
Okay, we'll get to that in just a moment. Judah, let me bring you in here, looking across other markets that you've had experience with, especially developing countries, and how they're trying to boost their economic growth via deepening their broadband. Would you say that they're taking advantage, and to what extent would you say they're also have been able to attract private capital?
Well, there's a great deal of interest in investing in broadband infrastructure and broadband services across markets. And we've seen a real rising tide in terms of the investment into emerging markets specifically across Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, across North Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And the question really ultimately depends on a market-specific approach and what has occurred in specific markets. We're finding that in some markets, the level of penetration of services and associated investment is quite high and rising. And in some markets, it perhaps is not quite as aggressive due to various constraints. Overall, when you look across emerging markets, you see a lot of excitement with the evolution of technologies. People have been obviously trying to extend 4G coverage and penetration. And we even hear discussion about 5G. People are asking, when might 5G come? What would be the impact? And we're still working hard to try and get 4G in the right place and try and get fixed services where they should be. But in general, we're seeing a lot of excitement and interest from investors and really trying to understand what are the drivers, what are the opportunities that might facilitate investment across markets.
Okay. Funke, let's talk about the project that Mainone is working on, Digital Lagos. Talk to us about it.
Okay. So Digital Lagos is our plan to deploy shared fiber infrastructure across all of Lagos State. Mainone has a wholesale fiber license as the first private submarine cable system to land in the country as well. We still have a lot of our pipe and international waters unutilized. So we recognize that the bottleneck in terms of broadband access is really that distribution infrastructure. What Digital Lagos is, at the very first instance, is an investment of over 25 billion naira into building out this fiber infrastructure to touch every local government. Over 95% of the identified schools in Lagos, and we've identified over 3,000 of them, over 1,000 hospitals or health facilities, over 300 government offices, all the major thoroughfares, all the growing population centers in Lagos, be it Alimosho, Ikorodu, some of these far-flung areas that typically have not been well served by infrastructure. And what we're doing is rolling out a plan where we start putting in fiber infrastructure that can be accessed by mobile network operators to deploy 4G, so fiber to the towers, internet service providers, Wi-Fi providers, businesses, and really start changing the narrative around broadband access and broadband availability in Lagos. It's a 2 to 3 year plan to fully implement, and we believe that the impact as we roll out that infrastructure will be felt within 12 months.
Now, Judah, you're also working on this project with Mainone, looking at Lagos as a city and comparing it to other cities, because I mean, just looking at the workability and how, just looking at, or maybe not taking a leaf from other cities similar to Lagos, but just looking at how it could work in Lagos based on what you've seen in other cities. What would you say were some of the key differences that you saw, or things that you thought could help to bring this Lagos plan to life, as it were?
Well, one of the things that we're seeing is really, in a sense, a competition among cities, mega cities, to drive investment and really overall economic activity. And telecom infrastructure is the bedrock to a great degree, like other key utilities, to economic activity. And for cities to be competitive in this century, the more infrastructure, more enabling digital infrastructure the city has, the better it is. And when we look around Africa at cities like Nairobi and Johannesburg, what we see is that over the last several years, the amounts of investment and the rollout of fiber infrastructure, along with other types of digital infrastructure, have really increased substantially. So when we think about fiber, a key success factor is not just sort of having fiber access the country or even get to the gates of the city, but how deep it goes within the city. The concept of densification, of trying to get as much fiber as possible deployed across the city. And when we look at Nairobi, and for example at Johannesburg, a significant amount of fiber has gotten deployed locally in recent years. And it's no surprise as well that we've seen the contribution of the digital economy and the fintech economy and startup in general really take off in these cities. And the economic growth has been really substantial.
Interesting. Now, Funke, the Lagos State government also has this ambitious plan, the incoming administration has this ambitious plan to also, deepen broadband penetration in the state and just, just thinking about security and some other, items on his list for how to take Lagos from where it is right now to a smart, cosmopolitan city. Help us understand how Mainone, this project is going to plug into that big picture for Lagos State. Okay,
so I'll take a couple of areas, and it's really about turning Lagos from a mega city into a smart city or a 21st century economy. So one, you take security and the issues that plague us, and having cameras all connected because now you have a viable network and you have that infrastructure that spans the entire state. And so security agencies can monitor trouble spots. You can deploy machine learning when you see certain kinds of images or sounds or crowds or whatever, and you need to pay particular attention ensuring that the security agents or the security forces are deployed to the right places and the right time so that we can ensure better security. Also serves as a deterrent when people know that those kinds of resources or infrastructure is available to capture what is going on around the state, even when you don't have an immediate visible physical presence of security agencies. The other one is really economic and job creation. And previously, Mainone had done a pilot where we deployed fiber infrastructure in Yaba, working with CC Hub, which is one of the key leading tech incubators I think we have in Nigeria. And we've seen from our work the number of startups that we've been able to support with infrastructure to get their business models going online, and how much foreign direct investment that has generated, be it CC Hub itself or companies like Andela, Hotels.ng, Paga, Flutterwave, a lot of these businesses who are reliant on having access to this kind of infrastructure to generate investment, to create jobs. So if Lagos is going to create jobs over the upcoming years, it's certainly not going to come from agriculture. And the barrier to creating jobs, tech jobs, are much lower in that sense. It's this kind of infrastructure that you need, but a young person with access to the internet and a laptop or even a smartphone can start writing apps and creating software and delivering services
just,
on a
based
global
on
basis.
That access.
Just based on that access. And so we believe this is going to be critical. If you look at the areas Lagos wants to have an impact, be it entertainment, be it tourism, be it smart transportation, this has a significant impact. Education. We talked about getting this access to all the schools. How do you prepare the youth for 21st century jobs if they don't have access to technology? If they're not,
Trust me, that is a question I continue to ask my guests on a daily basis. Judah, would you like to share your perspective on that?
Well, I mean, I totally agree with Funke. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have good intentions, but you don't have connectivity, you're only going to get so far.
True.
And to your point about youth, they can do an incredible amount even on their own if they have access to the tools and to the facilities. And one of the things we did on this study is we really tried to understand what is the level of access that schools and hospitals and other sort of critical institutions in Lagos have to potential connectivity. And at the end of the day, while there is a level of access which is reasonable, it could be certainly improved in terms of the proximity which some of these important institutions, hospitals and schools have to fiber. Because fiber at the end of the day is the lifeblood for the connectivity and for the services. So that's on that front. And also I think in terms of government services, if you have more of the different service providing facilities connected to fiber, it could certainly help in terms of e-government and other initiatives of that variety.
Okay, we're going to take a short break at this point. Thank you for your time so far. We'll come back and pick up from where we left off. I've been speaking to Judah Levine, who's the CEO of HIP Consult, and also Funke Opeke, CEO of Mainone. We'll continue our discussion after this short break. To join us again. If you're just joining us, Judah Levine, CEO of HIP Consult, and Funke Opeke, CEO of Mainone, are with me today, and we're discussing how broadband access can help drive Nigeria's future economy. Thank you so much for your time so far. Funke, let's get right down to, I want us to break this down. Now, this is not a project, this is not a Lagos State project, right?
No, this is a Mainone private sector
project. Now, you're going to deploy this across public schools, some of the hinterlands here in Lagos. Okay, and some local government areas. I'm just wondering, this is going to span over how long in the first place, and how much of investment is going to go into this? Okay,
so the initial plan that we have that covers over 95% of schools, hospitals, over 300 government locations, is over 2,000 kilometers. So it's 2,000 kilometers across the state, getting to every local government.
Every local
government in the state of Lagos. So that's 2,200 kilometers of fiber. Our build plan to deliver that is over a period of 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Obviously, Lagos is very dense, and in some areas we're going to have greater challenges in terms of existing infrastructure to be able to walk around that, drill under the ground in areas where necessary, where you can't go in from the surface to get this infrastructure built. Even with all the right permits, work with property owners and ongoing road works or construction to ensure that this infrastructure that we are deploying is safe and usable. So we expect that given what we're trying to achieve, that initial deployment will require somewhere between 2 to 3 years to complete. However, we expect within 6 to 12 months, sections of the infrastructure will be completed and will start bringing up services or making the infrastructure available to other service providers as well as ourselves bringing up services to meet the needs of the population.
I was going to ask you about those barriers, because I know that we've talked in the past about the barriers, especially right of way, and how you had to, of course, appeal to the government to help address some of these issues. But Judah, let me ask you, I mean, in your experience and also working on the project, those barriers that continue to hinder the progress of broadband penetration, would you say that those barriers, I mean, maybe for Lagos State, for Nigeria, those barriers, would you say that we're significantly tackling those barriers? Would you say that the government is more willing now, more keen now to, partner with private companies like Mainone to address those barriers?
Well, we're certainly hearing that there is a lot of interest in trying to move some of these issues forward. There have been challenges. I think it's known that there have been challenges in the past in trying to get certain permits and access to deploy infrastructure, and certainly in the post the recent elections, there have been some statements from the federal government about how important it is to deploy additional fiber infrastructure. And also the incoming administration here in Lagos has also indicated how important it is to progress with these types of initiatives. And so certainly the environment seems to be conducive.
So you're expecting that, sorry to butt in, you're expecting that this time around, there's maybe challenges will still be there, but the attitude, I mean, the body language, the effort will be different in terms of helping you, have, less stressful time, as it were, laying the infrastructure.
At the end of the day, the ability to see these kind of projects come about is a combination of access, ability to gain access to some of the, to the roads and other infrastructure that enables deployment, and investment. In this case, you have a very nice combination of a company that's prepared to make that investment and enable the deployment and the operation of this infrastructure, and fundamentally, as long as there's a willingness on the part of the authorities to see that through, certainly there's no reason why this should not succeed.
I mean, let's hope that, that will be the case at the end of the day. But Funke, in terms of the impact this is going to have, if you're going through schools, you're going into the hinterland, you're going to, for health services, my mind goes to, for the health services, usability on their part, but maybe that's a different conversation entirely. But for you, the kind of impact that we should expect if this is successfully rolled out over the next 2 to 3 years, what should we expect? Job creation, and just how this changes the landscape for Lagos as wanting to be a smart city.
Well, I think just as you said, the potential is phenomenal. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into usability and productivity, but without the infrastructure in the first place, you're not getting off the dime. As you said, healthcare, access to specialists from remote areas, education, access to all kinds of educational material on the internet. The schools still have their parts to play, the administration, obviously, in equipping the students with the right access devices. But the big barrier in terms of connectivity is removed. When you talk about job creation, again, for young people, now you have access. 3 guys can get together, write software, not just for the Nigerian market. They can make their services available in the global market. And we're seeing that come out of Nigeria already. And then when you think of traditional industries as well, the ability to apply technology to make those businesses more productive, extend the market reach of those services, we think it's huge. If you create 500,000 jobs in Lagos, and that's not unimaginable with this kind of access. You're talking about an addition of up to 100 billion into the Lagos economy on an annual basis. So the results are huge, and studies in other parts of the world by the World Bank have shown that broadband is able to bring this kind of economic growth.
Yeah. Judah, is there a city that comes to mind for you? I know you mentioned Johannesburg, you mentioned Kenya, but perhaps a city that may be very close to what we have here in Lagos that rolled out something similar and is already experiencing that impact.
Well, I think there's a few cities where you see a lot more densification of fiber. For example, Accra has made a lot of strides. Even cities like Kigali, Dar es Salaam is a good example where there's been a lot of deployment over recent years. And I think there's an appreciation for many of the factors that were cited by Funke. At the end of the day, to really enable that growth of the digital economy and some of that impact, there's debates about the exact impact, but there's no disagreement that having access to digital services is in broadband in general, is a huge driver of economic development. So when it comes to job creation, when it comes to having those sort of innovation hubs that really everybody is trying to bring about, the smart city activity, and certainly those government services you talked about, it's one thing to talk about e-health and talk about e-education, but you can't get that E or you can't get that M in M-education, M-health without the fundamental connectivity. And so we do see a lot of activity across major cities in Africa. And it is a little bit of a race right now.
I would imagine. So Lagos State first. I mean, I'm just looking into the big picture here. Funke, going forward, let's talk hypothetically speaking, 2-3 years down the line, this is successfully rolled out. What will be the next footprint for you? Is Lagos a special project for you? Is this something you want to do and then look to other states to do? I
think we would look to the opportunity to work with other states. There are infracos licensed in those other states. Some, the North Central region is still open for licensing. But we would like to continue deploying infrastructure across the country. We don't think this should be limited to Lagos only. We have done some small projects in Abeokuta and Benin City where we are connecting locations for those state governments across the state to deliver e-government services. We're also making that infrastructure available, and we're seeing a lot of interest from service providers in those cities to access the internet via our infrastructure. And we hope that we'll be able to, either ourselves directly or working with other partners, extend such infrastructure around more parts of the country. Okay,
but going forward, do you see Nigeria? I mean, do you see us coming into that place where, the entire country is connected and it's also boosting, at the same time, boosting economic growth? We're talking about creating jobs, but just coming into that fullness of connectivity as well.
Well, it's a question of when, right? Not if. We don't have an alternative. When you look at the challenges that plague us, be it the need to diversify from oil, the need for economic growth, insecurity, the underlying facilitator of all this, of course, electricity, better roads and access, but broadband is way up there. So when they have the electricity, what are they going to do with it? How many people can build factories of their own? Even if you're doing farming, you need information on weather, you need access to market, and technology is what's going to make that happen. So it is imperative. I think that is why the NCC is revisiting the broadband plan to say we need to get to 70%. Not just in Lagos, but across the country, broadband access and penetration. And I think like other leading economies, which have said, pervasive broadband is really critical for us to continue to grow our economies and create jobs. For Nigeria, I think it's particularly important as we try to move away from being a mono economy.
Commodity dependent. I was just thinking about how so dependent many African economies are on their commodities. But do you think, obviously ICT presents that, huge chance to diversify. What are your hopes, expectations from what you see, from what you in your experience working with other partners or clients in terms of how Africa is moving away from that focus on commodity, and investing more in ICT?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's not either or. I think the commodity industries are going to and even agriculture are going to remain super important. But by the same token, you have to open up an entire new vista to the digital economy. And when we look, for example, at Nigeria overall, we see that the fiber reach of the country, or the percentage of people that live within 5 kilometers of fiber, is approximately 46%. And if you look at some other markets, for example, South Africa is probably in the 70s. Okay. And as you look more closely at the urban populations and at the smaller towns and how close they live to infrastructure, the gap actually gets a little bit bigger. So at the end of the day, really, you have to create a foundation, an infrastructure foundation fiber, towers, data centers, other types of facilities, and of course the enabling power infrastructure, in order to even enable those initial steps to move into that sort of digital economy. So really, it's not either or, but you're additive, you're bringing the digital economy, and everything you do in the digital economy, in a sense, supports the traditional economy. Okay. It gets that much more competitive.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there today. Thank you so much for talking to us. We appreciate your time on the show. I've been speaking to Judah Levine, CEO of HIP Consult, and Funke Opeke, CEO of Mainone. Well, that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of Beyond Markets on our website at cnbcafrica.com. Of course, you can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can send tweets to my Twitter handle too at Esther O. Awoni. For myself and the team, it's bye for now.